Hi, everybody. This is the Gospel of Mark study. This is going to be our 11th study, and that's going to bring us to Mark chapter 5, verse 21. And we're going to go all the way into chapter 6, verse 6. And we're going to be looking really at this subject of faith and the whole idea that faith matters. That God, in His sovereign providential purposes and plans, still uses and ordains means to his end. So, in his providential sovereign plan, God determines what he's going to do. He determines the outcome, if you will, of history and events in history, events in our lives, and really the outcome of our lives. But he also ordains the means by which he is going to bring those outcomes. And so here in Mark chapter 5, verses 21 all the way through the end of that chapter, and then into Mark chapter 6, 1 through 6, we're going to see Jesus doing miracles. And we're going to see the place that people's faith plays in those miracles, okay? And we're going to see the place that people's lack of faith plays in those times when God does not do the miraculous on behalf of people. So let's start in Mark chapter 5 in verse 21. Now, again, this is following Jesus saving and restoring, reconciling to God the Gerasene demoniac, which we saw in our last study. So he is over on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and now in verse 21 of Mark 5, he's moving back across to the western side, heading toward Capernaum in that area. So verse 21, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, that's the Sea of Galilee, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. There's that large crowd that is continuously following Jesus because they want to see the great miraculous works that he is doing. They are interested in his miraculous works, which they have never seen before, but they're not so much interested in him or in his gospel message. Verse 22, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. Now, a synagogue leader is not so much one of the Pharisees or the scribes. This would be the man who is basically in charge of the synagogue. And we're talking about the logistics, the administration, making sure that the teachers are there, making sure that everything runs smoothly. So he's kind of the administrator, the executive pastor, maybe is what we would call them today, maybe the chairman of the board. But this is what Jairus does. And so he's a very important figure in the synagogue. So he's also a Jewish man, because only a Jewish man would be involved in the synagogue, and especially in such a high level in the synagogue. So he comes and he falls at Jesus' feet, which is unheard of. It'd be unheard of for any Jewish man to fall at the feet of another man, especially one that is working within the religious system of Israel. So there is something that is driving this man to fall at Jesus' feet. Now look at verse 23. We see what it is. He pleaded earnestly with him. He continues to plead. That's the idea. This is a continual pleading and begging, if you will. And he says, my little daughter, who happens to be 12 years old, okay, but still, little daughter, in his mind, that's a little girl. My little daughter is dying. Okay, there we have the desperation that causes this man to fall at Jesus' feet. But why Jesus? Because he knows that Jesus somehow can deliver his little girl from death. So he says, please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. Man, this is tremendous faith right here, especially for a Jewish religious leader, the head of the synagogue. And he's putting it all on the line because he's falling at Jesus' feet in the middle of this huge crowd, in the middle of the town in which he works. And so if Jesus fails, if Jesus does not come through for him, I mean, this is real vulnerability here, okay? And so this is really a great act of faith. He believes that Jesus is able to help him. And in fact, more than that, he believes Jesus is the only one who can help him. So Jesus went with him. Now, I wonder if this man had just come up to Jesus and said, hey, listen, Jesus, if you don't have anything better to do, and if I'm not bothering you, and if there is anything you could possibly do to help, would you please come with me and see about maybe helping out my little girl who happens to be dying? I think that verse 24 would be completely different. I think it would say that Jesus did not go with him. I tell you what, Jesus went with him because Jesus sees the faith of this man, the desperation of this man, and the desperate condition that his child is in. Now, we have that happening, and then the large crowd, they're not going to miss this. So the large crowd followed, and they pressed around him. Even though they know that Jesus needs to get there, Jesus needs to get there desperately and quickly because this is an urgent matter. The crowd still is not going to let him through. This is kind of like a crowd on the highway that's not letting the ambulance through. They're just not letting him get through. And then in verse 25, we have this interruption. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. So now we have a 12-year-old girl who is dying and needs help. And now we have a woman who has been suffering from a medical condition for 12 years and has not had any hope. She has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Now, probably what this woman had was a condition that we know today as obstetric fistula. That is a condition, as I understand it, that occurs with some women when they are giving childbirth, when they're having a baby, and a tear occurs which does not heal and it causes bleeding. Now, I found out today as I was studying this that they believe that over 4 million women in Africa suffer from this disease, and if they don't get help, they just continue to bleed, and it causes all kinds of problems. Now, here in the United States, this is a condition that can be fixed, it can be repaired, but in other places of the world, third world countries, it can't be. And so this is the condition this woman is in. She's probably got this bleeding, which has been caused by childbirth, and no one has been able to help her, and she is continually bleeding. She's gone to doctors, they don't know how to help her, and so she spends all her money, all of her resources trying to get healed of something that nobody can help her with. And so she too is desperate because it just keeps getting worse. Now, her condition is desperate in another way too. It's desperate socially and it's desperate spiritually. Because she is continually bleeding, she is considered unclean, and so she cannot go into the temple, she can't go to the synagogue, she can't go near people. She's really a social outcast. So she's all alone, having to deal with this all by herself. Her husband can't even really come close to her and touch her, or he will be unclean. And so this is a woman who is desperate physically, socially, spiritually, every which way. But in verse 27, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd, and Luke's gospel and John's gospel and Matthew all talk about this story, and the idea that they give is that she kind of was crawling through the crowd, really, because then she touches the hem of his cloak, probably there at the bottom of his robe. Now, really, for her to even be in this crowd is something that would be considered unlawful, because she is mingling and actually touching other people, and she is unclean. But again, she is desperate, and she has to get to Jesus because she believes that Jesus can help her. There is faith, and that faith is being driven by this desperation, but also the knowledge that she had heard about Jesus. Now, Jairus has heard about Jesus too, and he knows that Jesus is the only one who can help his daughter. This woman has heard about Jesus, and she knows that Jesus is the only one that can help her. So verse 28, she touches his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. That's a lot of faith right there. Immediately After she touches his robe, the hem of his robe, the edge of his robe, immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. That means that her bleeding stopped and she felt something inside. She felt God giving her a new set of organs, is what she felt. She was healed completely. Listen, when Jesus healed people, he didn't heal in half measures. He healed completely. He healed totally. And so Jesus really just recreates her organs here, and she senses that something has happened inside. It was not just the cease of the blood flowing, it was the fact that she felt something. It happened inside of her. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Now, it seems kind of ironic that here is Jesus, who is the Son of God, and he's got the power to heal anybody that he wants, and yet he wouldn't know who it was that he was healing, who it was that touched his robe. And if he is omniscient, it would seem to be that he would know who it was that touched him. Well, let's follow the story a little bit further. He turned around in the crowd, and this crowd is all around him pressing, and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Verse 31, "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you are asking, 'Who touched me?'" I mean, everybody's touching you, right? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. So he is kind of like the preacher at the end of a service in some churches, giving this time of response, and the song might be playing, who knows, maybe it's "Just As I Am" or "I Surrender All," and he's just scanning that crowd, waiting for somebody to come forward, and everybody's looking and thinking that he's looking right at them, okay? Well, that's what Jesus is doing in this crowd. He's looking, he's gazing at the crowd, he's looking into the eyes of the people, and then finally in verse 33, then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Jesus knew who it was who touched him. Jesus was waiting for the woman to recognize what had happened to her. Recognize the fact that she had just been healed by God himself in human form. He wanted her to recognize that. He wanted her to realize that. And when she realized that, because Jesus gave her the time to recognize that, gave her the time to realize it, then she comes forward. That's what Jesus wants her to do, because Jesus wants to do something else for this woman. He wants to do more than just heal her physically. He wants to save her soul, okay? So she comes forward, she falls at his feet, and she is trembling with fear. This is not the fear, a negative fear, that he's going to do something bad to her. This is the fear that she realizes she is in the presence of God Almighty, El Shaddai, as we saw last Sunday. God the Son, who is the creator of heavens and earth. She realizes whose presence she is in. And she tells him the whole truth. When it says she tells him the whole truth, this is not just talking about the whole truth about just what happened right there. She begins to share her life with Jesus. She begins probably to confess her sins to Jesus. She is telling Jesus everything. And she is probably sharing her need of salvation, because look at his response in verse 34. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." And he uses the Greek word sozo, which is salvation. Your faith has saved you. Your faith has saved you. She was already healed. And so he says, listen, your faith not only brought about your healing, but your faith has also brought about your salvation. Go in peace. God never tells anybody to go in peace who is not at peace with him, okay? And so we know that something spiritually has taken place in this woman's life, and he calls her daughter. This is really the only time where you see Jesus calling a woman daughter, personally calling her daughter. She has now become a daughter of God, okay? Through saving faith in Jesus Christ, which is what the word sozo means when he uses that in reference to healing. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Well, she was already freed from her suffering because he healed her. And now he's saying, go in peace and be free. Future, present, right now, be free from your suffering, the kind of suffering that comes from sin that has not been dealt with, that has not been taken care of, that has not been atoned for by Jesus Christ, that has not been forgiven by God. Okay? So here's a woman who now is leaving not only physically healed, but she's also spiritually healed. She has been saved. Okay? So she gets a whole lot more than she really realized that she needed in her encounter with Jesus. But notice the importance that faith plays in this. So again, we would say that God in his sovereignty and in his providential purposes had chosen to call this woman to himself and save this woman. But notice that he uses her sickness to draw her to himself. He uses her desperation to draw her to himself. And then he uses her faith. That was the means by which she was going to come to Christ and believe in Christ and be saved. So it's not that God just calls you and chooses you and ordains that he's going to save you without also ordaining the means by which he's going to save you. And we know that we are saved by grace alone through what? Faith alone in Christ Jesus alone, right? Okay. Now, look what happens in verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus. Oh, remember Jairus, the synagogue leader. Jesus was on his way to go heal his daughter before his daughter died. But we had this interruption. We almost forgot about Jairus. Jairus is still there. He's still waiting for Jesus to get to his house to heal his daughter before his daughter dies. And Jesus allows this interruption and takes time to talk to this woman and takes time to hear her tell him the whole truth about her life. Listen, Jesus does not rush this encounter in order to make his next appointment, okay? But here we have Jairus, and he is still there. He's still waiting for Jesus to come, and obviously they're close to Jairus' house because out comes some people from his house. And they say in verse 35, your daughter is dead. Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Notice they don't call him a miracle worker. They refer to him as a teacher because that's what Jesus' primary task was to teach. He reached and he taught people, okay? And that's what we need to be doing today as well, reaching and teaching, okay? Using the miraculous. Jesus used the miraculous in order to authenticate that he was indeed the Messiah that the Old Testament said was going to come, okay? So, why bother the teacher anymore? And then verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, now this is important, don't be afraid, just believe. It literally in Greek, it's stop being afraid, quit being afraid, and keep believing, keep exercising faith in me. And Jesus is the object of his faith. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and he said to them, why all this commotion, wailing? The child is not dead but asleep. But they laughed at him. Now what's Jesus mean? He's making a statement. Death is temporary. Death is not a permanent state. Death is a temporary state for those who are believers in God. Okay? So he's saying, listen, she's not dead. She is asleep because I have the power over death. I have the power over the dead. And so he knows that he is going to raise this child from the dead. I think that this whole delay, this whole interruption with this woman with the issue of the flowing of her blood, the problem that she had, is engineered by God so that this girl will indeed die, so that when Jesus gets there, she's dead, and that Jesus is going to do the greater work, which is going to resurrect her from the dead. So let's keep following the story. He puts them out. They don't go out on their own, so he puts them out, forces them out. That's the idea. And then after forcing this scorning, laughing crowd out, he takes the child's father and mother, probably by the hand, by the shoulders. It's the idea of taking them gingerly, taking them lovingly, gently. And he takes the disciples who are with him, and they go in where the child was. She's lying there dead. He took her by the hand, And he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. It's a command. Get up. Rise. Rise from the dead. Immediately the girl stood up. She began to walk around, and here we're told she was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Now, here's a little girl whose father has great faith in Jesus, and I believe that Jairus does become a believer. He's got great faith in Jesus, that Jesus can heal his daughter. And then when she dies, Jesus says, don't be afraid, just keep believing. And this man keeps on believing, and Jesus heals his daughter. Now, it was God's sovereign, providential plan to heal this little girl, rise her from the dead, raise her from the dead. But he also had ordained the means by which he would do that, which was her father's faith. Okay, now let's look at what happens in Mark 6, 1 through 6. Jesus left there and he went to his hometown accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. They're amazed at his teaching. Where did this man get these things, they asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he's performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Listen, they're taking offense because they know him. A prophet is without honor in his own country. Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. And listen to this, verse 5. He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. It's not that Jesus lacked the power to do the miracles. There was no purpose, no reason, no definitive reason for him to do any miracles here, because these people had already made up their mind that he could not do anything, because after all, he was simply a local boy. So listen, they lost out in seeing Jesus do what Jesus could have done, because they already had made up their mind that Jesus could not do the miraculous in their midst. And so God uses their lack of faith, if you will, to not bring about what could have been brought about if they had had faith and exercised that faith. Listen, God uses our faith, our belief, in order to bring about his purposes, and he also uses our unbelief to bring about his purposes. Okay? So, here we find out that faith matters. What we believe about Jesus, what we believe about God, what we believe about what God can do matters. Do we believe that he is the God of the impossible? Do we believe that anything is too hard for God? If God has ordained, he's going to do it. Well, listen, our faith matters because God has also ordained how he's going to do his work, and he's going to do his work through our faith, our believing that he indeed is able to do whatever he has ordained to do, whatever he has promised to do. This isn't saying that we hold God responsible or accountable to do anything he has not promised to do. It is to say that we believe he can do whatever he said he will do. So that's Mark chapter 5 into Mark chapter 6, and we'll talk some more about these things and go a little bit further next time. God bless.